Hello everyone, this is Erik, the Asian movie enthusiast. So when we covered 2011 in this playlist, I mentioned that year was probably the least impressive in recent memory. Still, some interesting and entertaining movies for sure, but it did not appear to have the same overall quality as the years that preceded it. Thailand seemed to drop in production, for example. Also, South Korea contributed some watchable stuff that was more or less flawed and difficult to recommend with significant enthusiasm. The best Asian horror films from 2011 were mostly produced in Japan, with the exception of one surprise from the Philippines that took my number one spot on that list. So looking at the films I've seen from 2012, the industry I think took a step in the right direction because the top 10 list from this year is an improvement when compared to 2011, in my opinion. But still, 2012 did produce a number of underwhelming horror movies, as well as some merely watchable ones. South Korea, in particular, kind of dropped the ball this year. Of the 4 South Korean horror films that I saw that were released in 2012, 3 of them were underwhelming. Sure, the one good title was rather impressive and made my top 5 for this year, but this was a disappointing year for South Korean horror, in my opinion. Couple that with their so-so year from 2011, and back in the day in 2012, I was beginning to feel a little bit of frustration with that industry. Now, if you fast forward to 2017, I will gladly admit that South Korea has been producing some utterly fantastic horror films from recent years, even going back to 2013. But you're going to have to exhibit some patience when going through their titles from the early 2010s, especially 2011 and 2012. Now, Japan, on the other hand, had another solid year in 2012. That's no surprise given their pedigree and the fact that they produce more horror films, which gives them more opportunities to make high-quality, memorable stuff. Remember, South Korea, going back to 2000, has only produced maybe 4 or 5 horror films per year that are at least available to international audiences. So, that puts more pressure on that country to make each film count. Japan's production is far higher. I've personally seen about 15 Japanese horror movies per year on average, going back to the year 2000. And, there's a lot more direct-to-video stuff that is available without subtitles that I have not yet seen. So, that, I guess you could say, availability is another reason why Japan is very consistent at making quality horror films year in and year out. So as usual, this will be a 4-part video, with parts 3 and 4 dedicated to the more interesting and memorable films, but it's still informative and fun to cover the junk that's released, and that's what we'll be doing tonight. In fact, one of these titles is unquestionably one of the absolute worst Asian horror films of the last 20 years. But first, we have just a few honorable mentions here. Remember, these are films that some people classify as horror films, but I do not. The Neighbors, a thriller from South Korea, and Shady, a dark drama from Japan, are 2 films that should be high-priority titles for everyone out there. Another film that I enjoyed and would recommend is Howling, another thriller from South Korea. Alright, so let's begin our swim through the pond scum of 2012. And as always, titles for all the movies I discuss will be listed in the description box below. Now, our first film tonight is one of the most pathetic piles of crap you will ever see. And that is Sadako, also known as Sadako 3D, from Japan. A mysterious, white-clad man drops a long-haired woman into a well. Most unexpectedly, the well is full of women, all with long hair, and all dressed in white nightgowns. 13 years after the original film, Ringu, 2 suicides prompt a detective and his partner to investigate a string of mysterious deaths. The deaths involve video played on electronic devices, of course. Just before the deaths, a voice says, "You're not the one." The detective is unconvinced that supernatural phenomena have a role in these events, but his partner deduces that the deaths are the result of a cursed video that online artist Seiji Kashiwada created. I think that's Seiji Kashiwada, I'm sorry. So, Sadako 3D is pure, 100% undiluted dumpster juice, yes. It's not even the fresh kind of dumpster juice. It's actually from concentrate. So it's had ample time to rot and decay into a substance that's practically radioactive. Within the opening 2 minutes of this movie, you know this is going to be garbage. It's not an exaggeration, folks. The opening 2 minutes are god-awful because we are immediately introduced to our villain and his terribly acted evil laugh. Not sure where they found this actor, but it's an atrocious casting choice. I don't know how he even has a career in acting. It's that bad. Then, less than 2 minutes later, I'm not joking, we are subjected to a CGI hand that reaches through a computer screen, and the hand reaches towards the viewer. Because, 3D. The movie proves to be completely unwatchable right from the start, and this just stays unwatchable the whole way through. Now, the actor who played the villain isn't the only one that comes out looking bad here. Performances are systematically awful. It's so bad that it's practically a spoof movie without even knowing it. CGI effects and excessive slow motion completely ruin multiple death scenes. The scares are extremely repetitive as well, with almost every scene involving stuff that flies out of television screens at the viewer because, 3D. And it always looks atrocious. There are at least half a dozen scenes of our lead actress silently screaming. I don't know where they got this silently screaming thing where, her mouth will be open and she's screaming, but you can't hear any screaming. And it's slow motion with broken glass flying around her. And, this happens, at least half a dozen times in the film. Why were the filmmakers so obsessed with repeating such lame visuals in this film? I'll never understand it. I'll never understand that. There are a few cheap jump scares where no danger is present, of course. There are also a few multiple repetitive scenes of a creepy video involving our badly acted bad guy who has some kind of a seizure, he's convulsing. It's just stupid. Every single scene of this movie is portrayed in the most awkward and lame way humanly imaginable. There's a scene where our protagonist walks into a room with a long black wig on his head and then shoots himself in the head. I laughed. Stupid character decision-making is omnipresent as well. At one point, our protagonist is running from Sadako clones, and she finds a pipe, I think, on the floor. She uses it to beat. She actually beats Sadako upside the head with a pipe. Then, as more clones approach her, she just drops the pipe and runs away. You think you would at least keep the pipe to fend them off. I don't know. Sadako 3D showcases all of the bad things about Japanese horror with none of the good things. If someone told me that this film was the worst Asian horror film of all time, I would not be able to mount an argument against them. In fact, I wouldn't want to. If I had to choose between rewatching Sadako 3D or Discovery, the Thai horror film, I might choose Discovery. I'm not joking. So, yeah. Sadako 3D is unbelievably and unfortunately widely available for viewing. Just don't do it. Don't do it. This movie was so infuriating. I always get angry when people just throw Japanese horror under the bus. That'll be a video I do in the future. All Japanese horror films have ghost girls. And, Sadako 3D is one of those films that serves as evidence in support of such ridiculous claims. Absolutely hate this movie. It's worthless. Let's move on. We're stuck in Japan, unbelievably, though. The next one here is called Judgment. Again, Japanese horror thriller hybrid. An ex-boxer awakes in an unfamiliar room, chained from escape, and he's not alone. His training partner and his longtime rival are both mysteriously held captive as well. A woman's voice then emanates from the speakers, demanding that he kill one or the other to proceed with this game of death that has only just begun. There's no way out, and no one's coming to save him, so he makes his choice. But the nightmare doesn't end. He must continue to choose between those from his past, and the choice becomes harder and harder. When will it ever end? As I mentioned in my DVD playlist, my DVD collection playlist, when I reviewed this very briefly, this seems to be a ripoff of Saw. In fact, right on the front of the DVD it says, "Live or die, make your choice." So yeah, if you thought that, you're basically right. This is a ripoff of Saw. This is a worn-out premise, obviously, at this point in 2012, and this film brings nothing new or interesting to the table. Oh wait, the dude uses a bazooka to kill people, which sounds like a lot of fun, but it isn't. You see, this is one of the weakest bazookas in motion picture history because it causes no damage to the surrounding environment at all. So basically, there's like a splattering of blood on the screen from the torso of the victim, and that's it. It's a pretty big disappointment. I mean, you see this dude crank out this bazooka, you're like, whoa, let's do this. And then he shoots it, and like a CGI effect blows up, and you see the person, like, a little blood squirts out, and they fall over dead. It's horrible. There's also lots of badly written exposition between the characters. At one point, the boxer actually says, quote, "I am Rocky. He's like Mickey," unquote. Filmed entirely in one room, and the character interaction is painfully repetitive, shallow, and dull, as you might have guessed. Most of the film is the dude standing around with a bazooka on his shoulder. The main character is given a tiny bit of development, but all the supporting characters are given no development whatsoever, so there's really no stakes to anything in this film. In fact, new characters just fall from the ceiling as the film progresses, out of thin air. Yes, I'm not joking. Where exactly are these new prisoners coming from? They never show a hole, like in the ceiling, or a trapdoor anywhere. They just fall into frame. And then, like, he'll choose, and he'll kill one. And then the next one just, like, falls into frame, and everybody's just, like, looking up, like, where did these guys come from? It's bad. Not a good movie. Definitely one of my worst blind buys in recent memory. So, Judgment is widely available for viewing. Don't do it. Alright, so South Korea now contributes to the cesspool, the pond scum. Alright, this one sounded interesting the first time I heard of it, or even if you just look at the title. And that is Two Moons, also known as the Sleepless, from South Korea. So this film begins with a brief conversation between children. It's said that if you see two moons, then a ghost is near you. The two moons signify the meeting of the human world and the netherworld. It's then communicated that a family killed themselves in a house which lies in the middle of a forest. From there, our story begins when two women and a man wake up to find themselves in an abandoned house with no way out and no memory of how they got there. After attempting and failing to find their way out of the surrounding woodland area, they decide to wait for dawn and explore the abandoned house in the hope of finding information on what exactly is going on. So near the beginning of this movie, you're going to realize one very important thing. The high school girl character is completely obnoxious. I wanted to smack her in the face every time she opened her mouth. So grating on the ears, all she does is whine the entire time. I don't know if I should blame the actress, the script, or the direction, but probably all three are at fault, partially. Second thing you're going to notice is that the lighting in this movie sucks. Practically every scene is in like a pitch black room or a pitch black exterior location. You know, I know it's nighttime, but please properly light your movie. During a few scenes, I had no idea what was going on. It was so dark. It's quite infuriating. And this creates a very tedious viewing experience since the characters basically just walk around in the dark. The filmmakers fill the time with really boring dialogue, so there's no tension or establishment of dread at all. This is actually an 86-minute movie, and it feels a lot longer than that. You're constantly like waiting for something interesting to happen, and it doesn't really happen. I was constantly like kind of fidgeting in my seat while watching this, you know. Scare tactics, mostly mediocre, with a few jump scares tossed in for good measure. One scene is an homage to Alfred Hitchcock's film Psycho, but it's very short and seemingly pointless. There is one cool scene, though. There is one cool scene involving night vision, but that's the only legitimately compelling moment in the film, I think. The ultimate explanation for everything had some potential, I guess, but the script never really cashes in on it. After the big finale, you just shrug your shoulders and ask, that's it? You know? So I do not recommend Two Moons. Kind of a wasted opportunity. It is moderately available on DVD. I think Region 3. Alright, now Thailand gets into the mix now. We go to Thailand. And this film is called Dark Flight 407. So this is the journey of a passenger plane haunted by ghosts that gradually trick the passengers into going insane and killing each other. Apparently, this plane has a dark history behind it, and the spirits intend on taking revenge. So after takeoff, the ghosts quickly show themselves and scare the passengers out of their wits. Stuck in this restricted environment, can our protagonist survive long enough to fend off the ghosts and land the plane safely? So if I were just to describe Dark Flight 407 with one word, and one word only, that would be lame. Even as a mere popcorn film, this does not work on basically any level. So let's start with the special effects this time, okay, which were atrocious. There's a ton of completely unnecessary, low-grade CGI in this movie. For example, they use CGI for exterior shots of the airplane. I mean, use a model, for goodness sakes. I mean, filmmakers were able to do that 50 years ago, and it never, ever looked quite as fake as what we ended up with here. They also use CGI for the ghosts. Why? I mean, most of the time, the ghosts just stand there and maybe lunge towards the camera. Real actors can do that, people. You know, use them. Just put some makeup on them and, you know what I mean? I don't get it. The ghosts in this movie look fake almost all of the time. Characters, the protagonists, are actually quite annoying, with too much screaming and whining on display. The acting in this movie is not good. Despite the presence of Marsha Watanabe, who previously starred in Alone from 2007 and Phobia 2 from 2009, I was actually looking forward to Dark Flight 407 because she was in this movie. She's not in that many movies, and I like her a lot. But she's really got nothing to work with here. She probably gives the best performance in the film, but it's really not saying much in this case. The script is pure garbage, so, yeah. I wish she would have chosen a different horror film to be in. Now, I don't understand how the evil spirits were pacified at the end of this movie. I'll avoid spoilers for you, but usually the protagonists in these types of films will have to do something to elude the ghosts or pacify them to survive. But not here, apparently. I don't know. I didn't really understand that. And the very end of this film basically makes everything pointless. And you might understand that after you see it. Scare tactics are lazy, repetitive, and uninspired, usually taking the form of human craziness or cliched ghost imagery. Some of the death scenes are extremely stupid, too. Watch out for the flying hatchet scene. I laughed. As if that weren't bad enough, there are some pathetic attempts at melodramaticism that just were completely unearned. And the frustrating thing is that Thailand already used this premise in one of its short films in Phobia from 2008, and it was way better in that anthology, so go watch that one instead. Now, Dark Flight 407 is moderately available on DVD. You might be able to find it streaming on some sites as well. Alright, our next one here is another potential use of creativity that kind of fails. And that is The Ghost Tales. And this one is from Taiwan, so everyone is contributing tonight. After being discharged from the army, a man brings a lost goat home because no one claims it. On his way to the station, the goat starts talking, yes, and tells him an ancient Chinese ghost story. He talks to a young girl about this, but she's rather unimpressed. Luckily for him, the girl sees him with the goat and decides to start dating him because of this. It's a long story. After that, This man's younger sister steals some sacred rocks and angers some local spirits who want their stones back. But the girl returns the wrong stones, and the spirits promptly get pissed off. Things go from bad to worse from there, but the goat speaks up at an opportune time and offers a possible solution to the matter. Now, I probably did you a great disservice by explaining the general plot of this movie, because it sounds amazing. It actually kind of does. I mean, at the very least, given the plot synopsis, this should have provided a memorable experience that is filled with goofiness and talking goats, right? No, not really. On the contrary, I remember nothing about this movie. Not even the talking goat. That tells me that this film failed miserably to take advantage of its awkward premise. My notes say that the Ghost Tales doesn't even bother to establish an engaging storyline or characters either. Everyone just kind of sits around, and not a whole lot happens in this movie. There's also no creepy atmosphere, and the ending is actually quite stupid. Acting and direction are average, scare tactics are incompetent. I'll give props to the talking goat, though. I'll give props to him, which in actuality barely talks at all in the film, but, it's kind of a boring movie. This one's boring. And since I can't remember anything outside of what my notes really say, it's probably time to move on in this playlist. So I do not recommend The Ghost Tales, unfortunately. This is moderately available on DVD. I think mostly Region 3. Alright. Things are going to get a little bit better. A little bit better. I think the last 5 films we're covering tonight are a little bit better than the first 5. So let's get rolling here. The next one here is from South Korea, and that is Don't Click. Now, Wikipedia has a good plot synopsis here, so I'll quote that. Si-hee is a shop attendant who lives alone with her sister, the high school student Jung-mi, due to her mother's death and their father's decision to work in the United States. Now, due to a misunderstanding, she is estranged from her boyfriend, who tries to make amends. Jung-mi, who secretly earns money for both her and Si-hee's tuition by uploading viral videos, convinces the boyfriend to download a cursed video that supposedly kills its viewers. Now, the video is revealed to be a series of clips, 108 in total, which changes content after each viewing. The clips are about various things, including what appears to be witchcraft and sexual harassment of a middle-aged man towards a drunken woman. Now, since viewing the video, both Jung-mi and Si-hee begin to feel haunted by a presence. Now, you should know by now that cheap jump scares really irritate me, and this movie has too many of them near the beginning. The opening scene of this movie is actually successfully atmospheric, but it's undercut by a cheap jump scare as well as rushed execution. The sequence felt abrupt, and the filmmakers never really bothered to actually set it up, just set up the scene and the characters, or at least allow the viewer to immerse themselves in the atmosphere. Less than 5 minutes after that, there's a moment inside a department store that represents the kind of jump scare that is completely unacceptable. It has an amateurish setup to a jumpy moment where no danger is present. This happens 3 times within the opening 15 minutes of this movie, so Don't Click gets off on a really bad start. There are a few scares during the middle section that were decent, but we've seen them in other Asian horror films already for the most part. The finale consists of a lot of screaming and stuff getting wrecked inside of a bedroom, which, starts off kind of pretty well, but becomes rather monotonous as it moves along. In the end, there are no memorable scares in this movie. The premise, the cliched tapes or images is so cliched at this point. For goodness sakes, Ringu was released 14 years ago. Now, Korea made a film from 2011 that also involved a curse tape, White, Melody of the Curse, but that film was of a generally good quality and added some nuances that made it work. Don't Click tries to add something different by having the video content change every time someone views it, which is kind of interesting, but the images themselves failed to tell a story or add an interesting mythos to it. You think it would create puzzle pieces for the viewer to piece together what's going on. It doesn't really do that. Now, consequently, the story flow is clunky and boring here. A good cursed video film slowly kind of peels back layers and keeps you interested throughout. This one doesn't. It lazily throws the entire backstory into a 2-minute montage with lots of exposition by some random side character, and they drop that like right in the middle of the movie. So I was not impressed with that. There's a side theme of video surveillance that is heavily referenced throughout, but I kind of disliked how the film connected that theme to the curse itself. When you really think about it, the ghost acted a lot like a human being and how it got its revenge here. In fact, the film would have been even more interesting, I think, if it was restructured to have a human antagonist instead, with more emphasis on suspense and bloody violence instead of the supernatural stuff. It's just a thought I had while rewatching this one. Final shot is lame, by the way. Didn't like it. But one positive thing that I very much enjoyed were the lead actresses in this movie. Bo Young Park, who I've seen in a bunch of other stuff, and Byul Kang, which I haven't seen very much, are both very good in this. I very much enjoy their performances, and they are really the only thing that got me, through the movie. They gave it some type of entertainment value. But I do not recommend Don't Click. And it is available on Region 3 DVD with subtitles. Alright, our next film here is from Japan, and that is called The Slit-Mouthed Woman Returns, also known as Kuchisake Onna Returns. Our protagonist here is a graduate student majoring in the study of folklore. As part of her studies, she decides to travel to a small village with a group of friends to investigate local legends. Now, unbeknownst to her, the villagers actually worship Kuchisake Onna, the slit-mouthed woman, as a living god and intend to offer her and her friends up as a human sacrifice. Now, eventually, our protagonist is wounded and fights back by becoming a Kuchisake hunter. Now, I've seen a handful of films that concern the slit-mouthed woman legend. I mean, heck, in this playlist alone, I've already covered 4 such films. The Slit-Mouthed Woman from 2005, not good. Carved from 2007, which I enjoyed. Carved 0 from 2008, which I enjoyed. And Carved 2 from 2008, which was really good. Now, 3 out of those 4 movies were worth watching. So, this urban legend has a reliable pedigree in terms of film adaptations. Unfortunately, The Slit-Mouthed Woman Returns is not a good movie. It's a B-grade production to its core, which is not necessarily a problem for the better titles that I just mentioned. But this one feels low-grade compared to those other low-budget films. So, it's, I guess, ultra-low-grade. There's some bad acting on display here, which could be intentional for the purposes of creating humor. I couldn't really tell, but it doesn't work. The whole Kuchisake hunter element is poorly implemented. It's not as entertaining as it may sound on paper. This is not a Noboru Iguchi film where it just goes over the top with everything for the purposes of entertainment value, which it probably should have done with the whole Kuchisake hunter angle that it introduces, but it doesn't. Imagine if they made a movie about a Sadako hunter. You can't take it seriously. You just can't. So you should just go cheese, you know what I mean? Also, the slit-mouthed woman herself does look kind of awkward here. She's actually got short hair, which is quite odd, and she bites people like in the hand, almost like a dog. Character design just did not work for me. There are a couple of moments that are kind of good here, which I won't spoil, but they're too few and far between. So if you want a Japanese horror film about a girl who goes to a desolate area and tangles with cultists, check out X-Cross from 2007, which I reviewed in this playlist. So I do not recommend The Slit-Mouthed Woman Returns, and it is available on Region 2 DVD without subtitles. I did watch it on YouTube back in the day, but it's not up there, so you'll have to stick with non-subtitled version, I think, if you want to watch it. Alright, our next one here is from, looks like it's from China. Initially I thought it was from Hong Kong, but I think it might be Chinese. And that is Any Other Side. This is a horror anthology. This is an anthology of 3 films, 25 or so minutes each, The opening setup involves 5 friends who meet in a nightclub and share some spooky stories while they get trashed on low-grade liquor. Now, come on, admit it, girls. When you went out to the clubs in your college years, that's exactly what you went for. Spooky stories. In all seriousness, no, everyone knows that a nightclub is the worst place to tell stories because the music is so freaking loud that you can only hear someone talk if you're screaming in their ear at the top of their lungs. You know what I mean? This movie is completely unrealistic. But in any case, the first short film is titled Lost and is about a girl in a wheelchair who is being stalked by an intruder within her home. He wears a raincoat and apparently killed her twin sister, so she's rather stressed at the moment. Overall, it's mediocre stuff with a twist that's unjustified, confusing, and a bit gimmicky. One Way Only, the second short film, is about a man who experiences strange phenomena while driving home with his daughter. In typical fashion, this genius decides to take a shortcut and crazy stuff starts happening. This is mostly boring stuff with cyclical events that lack excitement and are seemingly random. It's not as smart as it thinks it is. Nurse on Duty, the third short film, is about a nurse and a doctor who flee from zombies in a hospital. Well, that's a premise that's a crowd pleaser, but it's the nurse's first night on duty, of course, which is an unnecessary cliche. The segment tries to implement humorous references to American films, but unfortunately the jokes are not implemented in clever ways. But it is somewhat watchable, I would say. I've read a few reviews online who asserted that this third segment is the worst of the anthology, but I do not agree with that. It's not good by any means, but it is slightly amusing, which is not something I can say about the first 2 segments. So in the end, one of the few impressive aspects about this anthology is that it has a certain slickness to its style, which I liked. And, you can watch the trailer on YouTube and see if that style is kind of attractive to you. If so, you may want to give it a shot, but it's really kind of a style over substance affair, and the style isn't good enough to make up for all of its flaws. There's also an homage to Michael Jackson's Thriller. So, I don't know. I didn't like it, though. So I do not recommend any other side. It's available on VCD with subtitles. Oh yes, VCDs. Check out my DVD playlist for the Chinese language films, and I explain what a VCD is, I think, there. Alright, 2 films left here. Excuse me. The next one is entitled The Cases, and this one is from Hong Kong. Everyone is contributing tonight, people. I'm not joking. So a mix of documentary with dramatic reenactments of various topics like witchcraft, suicide, and hauntings is what this one provides. The Case's original film title, a Chinese character meaning the worship of ghosts and gods, perhaps better illustrates what the movie is about. A Hong Kong supernatural specialist leads 3 attractive women to boldly go where no sane person has gone before, some of the most infamous forbidden places in Hong Kong, Tokyo, and Indonesia. Supported on their spooky journey by several Southeast Asian exorcists and witchcraft experts, the courageous crew makes close encounters with the supernatural world to get first-hand, never-before-seen documentary footage that offers a rare glimpse into the occult occurrences and inexplicable incidents that have so far defied scientific explanation. Now, documentary-style horror films are right up my alley, and we're going to see that a lot in the upcoming years, because I'm going to cover a bunch of Japanese documentary-style films that I really like. But we saw just how badly Hong Kong can do this kind of thing when they released The Unbelievable in 2009, which was unbelievably terrible. It was so terrible, in fact, that it won my prestigious award for Worst Asian Horror Film from that particular year. But most fortunately, The Cases isn't nearly as bad as that film, but that doesn't mean it's good. There is some stomach-churning animal violence in this, so be wary of that. I mean, you're confronted with it early on, too. When one of the exorcists actually bites the head off of 2 real-life hens and then sucks the blood out of them. So, yeah. These are not props either. They're real hens. Ozzy Osbourne would be proud of this man, but I simply thought it was disgusting. Luckily, those moments are few and far between, but they're still there. Surprisingly not scary at all for a documentary-style film. There is some cultural value, though, in explaining some of the rituals from different countries, pertaining to burials, witchcraft, etc. That's a little interesting. But it feels like informational, not cinematic. Almost like you were reading it out of a textbook. Fairly basic stuff that's so episodic that each segment of the film is too short to have any long-lasting impact. It jumps around a lot to different locations. And I don't really remember there being like a overarching story that kind of connected it all, you know what I mean, to add momentum. It's mostly mediocre and repetitive with lots of spirit summoning stuff. So The Cases really isn't a bad film by any means. It's simply too dry and uneventful for my liking. Do not recommend it. The Cases is available on Region 3 DVD with subtitles. Alright, our last film tonight is from China. Well, technically. I'll get to that in a minute. And it is called Nightmare, also known as Qing Yan. Funded by mainland China, but directed by Herman Yao, who primarily works in Hong Kong. So that's kind of why it's hard to distinguish this one, but technically I think it's a mainland Chinese film. This psychological horror film centers on a white-collar salaryman who suffers from chronic insomnia under the heavy pressure of urban life. Now, every sleepless night, he sees a ghostly woman, clad in white, dying a grisly death before his eyes before vanishing into thin air. So on the verge of mental breakdown, this man receives hypnotic treatment from his psychiatrist girlfriend, and shocking secrets of a horrifying murder case buried deep in his mind from 20 years ago begin to surface. So the lame scare tactics really kind of cheapen this experience. Virtually every single scare tactic in this film is pretty dumb, and will have one rolling their eyes in frustration. So for example, the opening scene is very rushed, only lasting a few seconds, with its big shock being a cheap jump scare in an elevator. Doesn't even bother to set it up, not a good start. And things don't get any better, with irritating jump scares and incompetent boom sounds littered all over the place in this movie. It's just lazy stuff, and there are way too many of these moments. The Onryo ghost is used a lot too, unfortunately, in this case. I usually don't necessarily mind the Onryo ghost used if the film around it is good, but in this case, no. To be fair, there is one cool rear window style sequence that legitimately surprised me, so I'll give it credit for that. This movie, it really kind of hangs its hat on its story. You could tell it's really trying to develop this story to have a big impact, but I just thought it was just kind of decent. You know what I mean? I found the flashback sequences to be actually fairly dull and lacking in dramatic impact, mostly because we never really get to know these characters much at all. On the positive side, there are some good atmospheric moments here, definitely. Camera work and lighting are actually impressive throughout, especially the nighttime shots, which I liked. There are also some lakeside settings that are very picturesque, so, there's something about Herman Yao. The guy, he's a good director. Some people hold him in high regard, but I don't know, there's just something about his films that just range between good and not good. There's very few Herman Yao films that I consider to be great. But that's just, I don't know, maybe that's just me. But I would not recommend Nightmare. And Nightmare is moderately available on DVD. So that concludes part 1 of our journey through Asian horror films released in 2012. And be sure to join me for part 2, where we will finish off the less impressive titles and kind of crack into some of the more watchable ones. So, as always, we will see you next time.